This is Starting Point, a podcast that tracks Guyana's unprecedented growth from all vantage points. Join your hosts, Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif, as they dive deep into the heart of topical issues.
Welcome to this week's episode of Starting Point. I am your host, Kiana Wilberg. Over the past few weeks, we have been engaging with a number of leaders within the political landscape to get an understanding of what are their plans for Guyana's future. We've also been engaging stakeholders to understand their perception of the development that's taking place. With mere days before the 2025 elections, we're also catching up with some of the new faces on the political campaign. One such person is with me today, and his name is Dr. Kofi Dalrymple. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Technology at the University of Guyana. Dr. Dalrymple, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
So, I want to understand a bit about what drew you to engineering. You have quite the impressive background, and I'm not going to take that spotlight from you. Let me hand the floor over to you to let our audience know a little bit about yourself and what drew you to that field.
All right, so thank you. Um, my journey probably began like most Guyanese. I grew up in the quiet countryside of Stewartville. I was born in Denhamstill and I grew up in Stewartville. And I think I had a regular childhood like every other Guyanese. I ran around the streets, played in the trenches, swam on the seawall, ate lots of mangoes and guava like everybody else. But I grew up in a household where my parents took education seriously. They had their own challenges. My father, for example, would tell stories that he didn't get an opportunity at times to go to school like he wanted because it was important for him to work, and so he wanted certain things to happen for his children. He did get a chance later to go to the university and do other things, but he remembered in his early life, he wanted his children to get a very good start. I was sometimes resistant to that as a child, and I always felt, and I say this to people, the difference sometimes between success and failure is just having somebody behind you. And in this case, it was my parents. And I remember writing common entrance and getting to go to Saints. And then my other career at the time was to be a DJ or be something else, which I thought was fun then. And I went to Saints. I excelled there at school. I met a lot of good people at Saints. And the high school years, I think, here in Guyana have a way of creating friendships that last forever. And when I wanted to go on and study, I thought of medicine like every other student. I think they think of medicine, they think of law, and I wanted to do environment. Around that time, environmental sustainability is becoming a major issue. This is in the late 90s, and I wanted to be an environmentalist. And my mother looked at my grades. I had physics, chemistry, English, all the subjects I'd written. I'd written math in fourth form because I was a good math student. And my mother being an engineer, said to me, my mother's a civil engineer, she said, I think you should give engineering a try. And at first I was a little reluctant.
Why?
I was reluctant because I didn't understand what engineering was at the time. And I so wanted to do environmental sciences. But then she explained to me that later in engineering, you are going to get an opportunity to do environmental work. But she said something to me I never forget. She said, if you've got this technical background and you start there, you can branch off into anything else later in your life, right? And I trusted her in that. And so I started the engineering program and I quit the first semester. I went home and I said, this is not for me. I don't want to be an engineer. And I quit. And she was very concerned, and I thought about it. I said, look, I'm just going to go and work, and I'll figure this out. My mom, she stayed behind me, and she took me to have a conversation with some lecturers. Today, as the dean, actually, some of them still teach in the faculty.
Wow.
And I'm the dean, and they used to be my mentors at the time. And so she took me, we sat down, and we spoke, and I said, I'll give it a shot. And she gave me this poem, Don't Quit, and I stuck with it. And after that, I went back to school, finished my associates, went into the year's attachment, learned from other engineers, had some really good lessons about if you want to be good, you got to get up every day and work hard to do it. I remember Dennis Young saying to me, Competence is not something that you put on in the morning like a suit and walk out the house. It's something that you build over time, you know. And I remember those lessons from being 18 and 19 and decide that's what I wanted to do. And I remember my first sort of attachment. I was working up the Berbice River with a bauxite mining company. And there were so many things at this company that I could work on. And I really I fell in love with solving problems. And that's when I discovered the beauty of engineering. It wasn't just about the math, it was about the way of thinking. It wasn't just about, you know, the strength of the materials, but understanding how you could shape different things to achieve different goals. And so that problem-solving skill really kicked in. And I was like, this is it. So I went back to the university.
That's when you found the magic of it.
That's when, you know, like the light goes off and the bulb goes off and you see the bulb in the top of your head. I went back and I really started pushing, graduated at the top of the class. Then I got invited to go to get a scholarship. I actually, when I left the university and I graduated, I remember one of my mentors picked me up and took me to an office. And he goes, "This is the buy for the job." That's what he said. He said, "This is it." So clearly he was talking to his friends about me. He said, "This is the buy for the job." And I got the job. That was the interview. And I got the job. I worked for a year as an engineer. And then I got this invitation. Well, I applied for a scholarship. And I got through. CETA, that's the Canadians, paid for a scholarship. So I could go study natural resources management at the University of the West Indies. I was the only engineer that they took in. They never took in any other engineers. And I told them, I said, look, this is something I always wanted to do. It's an environmental program. It teaches you about natural resources, managing natural resources.
Was this your way of reconnecting with your first love?
Absolutely. So
okay, I see.
now my mother's advice is starting to make sense to me. So I said to them, I said, and they didn't see it yet. They said, we've never had an engineer in this program. I said, allow me to do this program. This is what I wanted to do. I wouldn't let you down. And I made a deal, actually. I remember with the head of the program. I said, if I get straight A's in this program, will you pay for me to go present my research summaries? And he said, deal. Long story short, I met him at Pegasus and got my 500 US from him. So I was the first to go into the program as an engineer, did well in the program. And I think they started opening up the program for engineers because we started to realize that, you know, one of my mentors used to say, the world has problems and universities have departments. And what he meant by that is problems don't come in departments. They come multifaceted, multidimensional. And if you want to be successful, you got to be able to think outside the box. You got to be able to think outside of your own discipline. And that's the kind of engineer that I wanted to be. So I went into this area. I started pursuing studies in climate change, and I started to understand, how does climate change affect Guyana? How does it affect the coast? How does it affect farmers, regular people, businesses? And so I worked in that area, and I started publishing work on sea level rise and the projections and its impact, on the Guyana coast. I came back home after I was in Barbados, and I worked with Sea Defense for a year. And then I got invited to do some work in Barbados, working on a big project there, tourism project. They were doing some work on the cave, Harrison's Cave. And we did some amazing work there with a Canadian consulting company. And even when I was doing that, the problem solving never stopped because I was coding and doing things they'd never seen some engineers do. They wanted an environmental person, but they got a problem solver. And so we really changed things up. And then I got invited to go do my PhD. Before that, I was working with SEDEMA, and we were trying to solve vulnerability issues in the Caribbean for houses. You know, there's a lot of vulnerability in the Caribbean.
Right.
Storms come through. How do you make a society more resilient to natural disasters was really the big question. And so I got an opportunity to work on that problem, and we did some good work. Liz Riley, for example, from Barbados, we did some really good work in that area. And then I got pulled to go do a PhD in the US. And as I was there, my mind opened to so many more things. So it was climate change. I got into biotechnology. I got into solar engineering. I sat in offices with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. And every time I was in those groups, I wanted to build competence in other areas. And so once my PhD was finished, I went off to work for a company that was trying to make biofuels from genetically modified algae. And I spent about 5-6 years becoming an expert in that area, one of few a company recently wanted to recruit me to go to Australia, and I told them I'm back home, and here's where I want to be. I want to serve my country, and so I sort of put that, in a different time. And so hopefully they found someone else, because I really did love that opportunity. But I really had some good opportunities, and I think the guidance I got early and sort of the educational drive really pushed me in the direction. And so after that, I ended up making vaccines in a company. I got a call one day.
Interesting.
I got a call one day from a scientist. He said, we're looking for someone who's never worked in the vaccine industry, but understands how to solve problems. And he looked at my CV and he said, you're an engineer, but you're working with genetically modified organisms and you're doing all this chemistry and science. So I said, yeah. I said, over my career, I've really balanced being a scientist and being an engineer together. And so I went to that company and did some amazing work in vaccine production, downstream processing, filtration systems, and a range of things, until I decided to move on and just go back to full engineering. I became a consultant, because after doing all of that, there was a consultancy waiting out there to say, hey, we want these skills. And so I went back to work for, a company that would design pharmaceutical buildings and processes. And so I was a senior process engineer doing work for them at that time. And then I came back home.
But Dr. Dalrymple, clearly with your degrees and your experience, you can easily build yourself a fortune through consultancies.
Correct.
But you're choosing politics to give your life to. What prompted that decision to choose that course as opposed to monetizing and building, amassing clearly a fortune for yourself? You can build yourself an empire with the knowledge that you have and the experience that you've amassed. So,
and that's a good point. And you said it there, right? I'm not looking for a job in politics. I love the jobs I have, and I've loved all the jobs I've had. I came to politics because I think I can help to shape my country. This is about legacy. And, in some ways, it's also about the little boy from Stewartville, in my view, who, even when I recited the pledge, I told people, there's this scripture that says, don't vow a vow that you don't intend to keep. And I say the pledge all the time. And there are certain things in the pledge about dedicating our energies towards the happiness and prosperity of our country. And I've always taken that seriously, even as a child. And I remember on my last job before coming home, when I actually got the job, I told them, I said, by the time I get to 40, I might actually quit this job, because I'd made a promise to go home and serve my country. And I didn't know in what capacity I would do it. I ended up teaching at the university. I got a call. As a matter of fact, when I made that decision, COVID happened, and I got a call, one of my old lecturers saying, do you want to teach? And I said, sure. And I was actually driving from the Midwest of the U.S. back to Florida, where I had studied, and my family was in the back of the car. And I get this call, and we decided during COVID we'd go to a place, because of all of the issues that we had during COVID, we'd go to a resort and just wait it out. And so we hung out there for a little bit. And the call came, and he said, when can you start? He says, when do you want me to start? I asked him. He said, tomorrow. And I said, fine. And it was in environmental engineering, the thing I'd become, right? Not just that I teach, but the thing I'd become. And I said, sure. And the next day, I got a Zoom link, and I started teaching remotely. And so that, I started following my passion and my dream, not money. I think money is a good thing, but it doesn't make you happy. I think it answers all things, as people say. You can get a lot of things, but you could also be very miserable. You can go to a job, make all the money in the world, and then go home every day completely unfulfilled and unhappy.
So for you, it's a sense of purpose.
To me, this is about a sense of purpose. I want to serve my country, and I think, sometimes we're serving millions of people, and sometimes decisions aren't always made with the right technical people in the room, people who understand how these things should be done. And I think part of what I'd like to do is to be counted among that as a Guyanese. I've never felt at home in any other country, This is my home. Here is where I always wanted to be. Here's where I've pledged. I've never pledged to another country.
But why
This is it for me.
politics? Why has the arena of politics pulled you in?
Yeah, well, there's two reasons. As I said, I think politics impacts a lot of people. And I think if you really want your skills and your decisions to have an impact, and the right impact on people, I think politics is a good place to be able to do that. Because we're making decisions about people's lives and their future. And I think we want the best people, the best skills, the most competent people doing that. This is not a game, right? It is serious business, as they say. And I think anyone would want that in politics, that the people who are making the decisions understand how to make those decisions. They've got some experience. They know what they're talking about. And I'm a Guyanese, and I see, why not? I want to make some inroads. Some of my love for politics, though, and my understanding of it comes from my father, who was a political activist in the early days with Rodney, right, with Dr. Rodney. So I learned a lot about Dr. Rodney. My father was in the WPA. And his sort of passion and drive for a better country and a better life is something I think also transferred to me growing up. You know, when I was young, my father used to design houses for people all the time. And they'd come, and sometimes they didn't always have money. And he'd always, sometimes he'd let them go ahead. He'll do the plans, he'll do the estimate, and and they'd owe him, and then he'll kind of let it go. And I remember seeing that. And I remember when I left the university, I started a business doing just that. I started a business designing homes. I was doing it with AutoCAD. He was doing it with his hand. So I could do it faster, I could do it better, I could do it more efficiently. And I remember one day sitting down with a couple, and they were talking about where to place the bathroom. And I remember sitting with the guy and saying, look, we want to put this bathroom in a private place. When your buddies come over and your wife wants to change a towel and she's got to go down the hall, you don't want her walking in front of your friends, right? So we started redesigning the space as to where people live. And I remember talking to friends about, how do you imagine yourself in this home? Like, what do you love? What do you want your children to do? And that really attracted me, this impact that you could have on people when you start to use your abilities to help them to see things, help them to see a vision, how it changes their lives. To me, that is politics. Politics for me is simply working with people, sharing a vision for a better society, a better life. And I want to be in that business. I want people to have a better life.
And in so doing, you have joined the People's Progressive Party Civic.
Correct.
Why that party, though you grew up learning about the principles of the Walter Rodney era? You could have joined the WPA.
Yes. well, I think that the Walter Rodney era grew out of something that the PPP started, I would say, in the 1950s as a united country. And I think a huge part of Dr. Rodney's ideas was the country should be united. You should take care of the poor. And everyone should be uplifted. And I still see those founding values in the PPP. What attracted me to the PPP is its track record to achieve exactly that. Its track record of building, not breaking. Its track record of uniting, not dividing. And when I'm thinking of a political party, I think of seriousness. I think of competence. And for me, I see that in the PPP in terms of the way that they have governed the country, and particularly over the last 5 years, in terms of their vision, right? In terms of their vision, in terms of where we want to take Guyana, and in terms of the competence at the head of the party in terms of leading. It isn't a perfect party. There's no party anywhere in the world that is perfect. But I think this party has all of the right ingredients necessary to lead the country forward, particularly when it comes to competence and leadership. I don't see that in other parties. And so that's my choice.
I want to take you back to your profession or your vocation. You're the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Technology. And engineering is a field that is in demand at this point in time, especially where Guyana is going. So how are you preparing the next crop of engineering students, of professionals coming from this field? What are you imparting to them? What lessons do you impart on your lecturers? Walk me through the thought process behind that, because the time that you became entrusted and immersed in the world of engineering, it's a different time
It is.
in Guyana.
But it's a better time, though. This time is a better time, especially with the free education start, because back then, a lot of people who wanted to be engineers couldn't pay the university. They couldn't find a co-signer on their loans and things like that. They went off to do other things. And people tell you that, right? People tell you that. So, again, I was fortunate. But I think today, it's a great time to be an engineer and to immerse yourself in it. The technology. As a matter of fact, when I sit in my classes with students, I integrate AI as part of the class, and I talk to students about this because I'm very technological. I still code. I still do all of the fundamental things that engineers do. But the bigger thing is, it's about the thinking. I really try to get them to think like an engineer. And it's the thing that I learned, which is solving problems. How do you solve problems? One of the things that we try to impart to students is don't become too dedicated or too committed to one particular type of engineering discipline, for example. The key thing here is that you're learning the critical thinking skills and the ability to go out there, because you don't know what problems you're going to run into, but you need to put in your toolbox the ability to analyze and define a problem. What is the problem? Once you have defined the problem, can you measure the problem? If you can measure it, then can we do an analysis to figure out what's gone wrong with the problem? And then if we can, a root cause analysis, we can come up with solutions. If you can come up with solutions, you can implement them, you can test them. And it's basically the problem-solving method that I really try to get into students' minds. Not the cramming. Yes, you have to learn your math and your physics. All of the fundamentals are necessary. But one of the things I really try to impart to engineers is really learning to solve a problem. And I learned that. In our program, I remember one of our lecturers came to us one day. He said, man, y'all know all this maths and y'all know all this stuff, but here's what I want y'all to do. Go out and come back to me with an idea to start an agricultural project and tell me how you're going to do it. And I want you to figure out how you're going to get the land, what you're going to grow, what machines you're going to put in place, and I want to see the business plan. You wouldn't think this is an engineering problem, but this is the kind of thinking that we want from students. And I remember him sending us out to do that. I came up with a passion fruit plantation, a plant that I actually gave away to a friend, and he actually started the business, I understand. But this is what we challenge our students to do. The other thing I try to tell students is they're living in a time of unprecedented opportunity. It's sort of everywhere they go, they see a lot of opportunities. I get calls all the time. Everyone's calling, and I need an engineer for this, or I need an engineer for that. And so I think there's an opportunity even for them to go into other forms of engineering that we didn't have. There's a high demand for things like chemical engineering, which the university is going to work on, and hopefully we can have more disciplines, engineering disciplines, coming forward for students to be able to go into. But I think, again, at the real heart of this is really imparting to students solving problems. One of the key things we also try to impart to engineers is ethics, engineering ethics. And ethics is really important. If engineers don't operate ethically, then bridges don't work, roads don't work, buildings don't work. And I think that it's really important for engineers to understand that we've incorporated a lot of this into our programs as well, in terms of being able to make the right decision and do the right things on the jobs, because you're sort of the gatekeepers of development out there, right? And sort of the architects of the future. And so we always seriously try to impart into engineers, do the right things as an engineer.
I think that ethics part is really important, because the infrastructure boom that you're seeing at this point in time, and the need, the skills gap that we have to fill, ensuring that the next crop coming out, that they understand how important that is to the future.
Absolutely.
I'm sure a lot of people are happy to hear that the University of Guyana is taking something like that very seriously.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we do. And the last aspect of this is finding ways to integrate engineers into the workforce in a way that, because of how rapidly things are happening, an engineer, like when I came out as an engineer, I could go into work where things are moving generally slowly. Not as much that's happening today. But today we've had to find ways to rapidly get an engineer basically to leave the university and then quickly acclimate into a fast-paced economy. And so it's almost like you have to start running, so that you can, as they're getting out of the university, in order to build pace to get out. And so we've done things like a workforce development program where we partner with industry to come in and work with students. They have to do an industrial attachment. That's always been that's one of the things that changed my life. And so they have to go into industry mandatory, that they spend at least 6 months, it used to be 10, in the industry, working with a mentor, working alongside someone, and sort of learning the practical aspects of engineering as well. But we're also incorporating in this program things like critical thinking skills, as I said, things like ethics, self-management, learning how to manage yourself. Self-discipline is important, time management, safety. We could have a whole conversation about safety, because we didn't always take safety seriously. So driving home the need to do things safely is really important. And then when they get towards the end of the program, we start talking about how to negotiate for jobs, how to talk about salaries, how to evaluate what's a good job offer and what's not a good job offer, and things like sexual harassment in the workplace. We're not waiting for them, for example, to get into the workplace, because when you go into the workplace, it's going to be diverse. You're going to have to know how to behave, how to do public speaking, how to do great presentations, and so all of that's incorporated. So we're doing a lot more on training, not just technically,
and building a well-rounded
engineer that can hit the ground running. Yeah.
I want to touch quickly on another important aspect that is part and parcel of who you are, who you've become, and that is the technological side.
Yes.
Now, we continue to hear, especially in this time, that there is a need to stimulate or create an environment where technological innovation can flourish. And I was happy that you touched on your experience in vaccines. And we hear that Guyana has the potential to be the next hub for vaccine manufacturing. I want you to talk a little bit about your thoughts on what is needed to stimulate this kind of environment and why you think that is possible at this point in time.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's important because the first thing I'd say is opportunity meets resources here. We now have the resources necessary to pursue technology in a way that we haven't before. And if we don't, we risk being left behind, given the pace at which things are going. And I think that now is the right time for us to think about some of these things and start doing them. They also kind of make us self-sufficient. This is one of the things that when you look at what happened during COVID, for example, the manufacturing capability for things like vaccines was an important factor in who had access to important vaccines. I mean, you think of that even in terms of food security, there's a kind of security for health that you also want to have, because vaccines is an important part of our health ecosystem. And so if we're speaking specifically to vaccine, we can speak specifically about how that can impact our ability to have access to things that we need in the healthcare system. And so when you look at, India, China, Russia, and you saw a number of countries sort of accelerated their ability to produce vaccines for certain, for COVID in particular, and you see how those engines started really firing. And it was good for the world because it wasn't only those countries, but they were able to start exporting vaccines. So I think it's important. I think we can do it. What we need is a good regulatory environment. We have some of that with, say, the new GPAT. So we understand what's needed in terms of quality. The biggest thing in vaccine is safety and efficacy. If I'm speaking specifically to vaccines here again, is safety and efficacy. And I think that we can build competence in those areas. So those are some of the high tech. But you can also look at technologies that look at food production, right? I worked in an area that looked at algae. And algae, these little photosynthetic organisms that could do some amazing things. They can produce oil, they can produce proteins, they could also produce biofuels. And so industrial or agrotech or biotech is a great place, particularly the photosynthetic types, the types that depend on light, when you think about all of the sunlight that we have here in Guyana. So we do have the opportunity and the ability to support some of these industries. The other thing I would say is rapid transformation. Things are happening fast, and technology has a way of helping you to do things faster. I give a simple example. I use AI to do coding now as an engineer. When I see a problem and I run into it, I like to automate things. It would take me 30 days sometimes to work on a particular code. Today, with an AI, I can finish it in 3 days. I can finish that project in 3 days. So when you think about how technology can accelerate our development and our growth as a country, there's so much more that we can do in a shorter space of time that allows us to catch up, right? And not have to wait 10 years or 20 years to be where we need to be as a country. So the president, for example, is talking about digitizing records. And, I've seen people gone into looking at how to search laws and databases and so forth, and connecting multiple databases for a more efficient society that delivers public service in a very efficient way, right where people need it. The way to achieve that is through technology, right? The best way to achieve that is through technology. And I think we've got, with our rapid development, we're going to need technology to be able to do that. And finally, I think in terms of opportunity for young people, I think most people, we joke that children are born knowing how to operate a cell phone, right? They just kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
Or you give them a device where they can't touch the screen and they go, wait, this thing is not touch screen. It's like old technology if you can't touch the screen. So I think the young generation is sort of born into tech, and I think naturally it's an area that they're going to go into. We've seen sort of the revolution of, where people became wealthy off of things like real estate and agriculture, but we've also seen people become millionaires doing YouTube and Facebook, right?
Yes,
and that's really been the technological revolution, and I think those opportunities shouldn't pass Guyana. We've got technology in healthcare. Right now I'm working on some projects in telemedicine, if we'll talk about that, but I started a business in telemedicine during COVID where we would connect individuals where a doctor couldn't come to you, but you could go on a computer and connect with a doctor and be able to have an assessment
That's
done.
really been on the rise in Guyana.
Exactly. We've been doing, I think, over 200 communities. This has been deployed in Guyana, and not just physical health, but also even counseling, where traditionally folks would go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but now you can do that over a phone or on a computer. And
it's really changing the game.
It is, right.
Yeah.
There are other technologies like drone technologies
Yep.
that we've got into for logistics and moving, blood samples, for example, from the interior to locations on the coast, or delivering things like snake bite medication into the interior, or other
using
kinds
drone
of
technology.
using drone technology. Yeah, using drone technology that was beyond what we call beyond visual line of sight, which basically you can pre-program it to fly into different areas at different times, deliver drugs, pick up blood samples, take them back to regional hospitals and things like that. So, and for the interior, when you think about our hinterland, for example, it's going to take us some time to build out roads in the hinterland, but some of these technologies can be bridging technology to get us there long before we've got a full road network, moving throughout the country.
I think those are some really important examples you mentioned there of how technology can be leveraged to help us leapfrog.
Absolutely. So
Yes,
I think the list is endless, but I really would like to see us embrace more and more technology in this way. I see some of it even in the transportation industry.
Yes.
You know, like they're kind of Uber type companies,
Yes,
and you know,
yes.
developing here in Guyana as well. And so I think we're going to see more of that. I think to young people, especially those who are listening, I think that landscape is endless, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And I hope we get to talk about some of the opportunities as to how in the next government,
Yeah.
you know, they can leverage those opportunities
That's
with things like
actually-
small businesses
yes.
and banks to be able to do this. But yeah.
So that's actually part of my closing question, because of course this conversation is truly enlightening, and I know that our audience is getting the opportunity to hear from the fresh faces and how they plan to make a difference. They hope to make a difference in this country's future. And so I want to just ask you in about 2 to 3 minutes to share with especially the youths of this nation why you believe the People's Progressive Party, Civic, is in the best interest for their future, and maybe you can touch on 1 or 2 things from the manifesto.
All right.
The floor is now yours.
So I have it here, and I really want to encourage everyone to get their hands on this document, right? It's available online. Vote PPPC2025.org. You can find it there. I really want people to go to it for themselves, because I'm only going to be able, in the time that you're giving me, to talk about a few things. The 3 things that jump out at me. The first is this document and the party's vision goes towards strengthening families. And the one thing I appreciate about strengthening families is that family is the basic unit of our society. If the family isn't functioning well, then the society isn't functioning well. This is where our children get their start in life. And if you don't get that good early start, that becomes a challenge. And one of the things that prevent a lot of families from really doing well is money. You know, a lot of families break up because of having to choose between sending your child to school and paying your bills sometimes. And no family in Guyana should be in a situation like that. And I love that this document says how we're going to take care of our families. From the time a child is born, there's a grant that assists. That immediately takes the stress off, because I'm sure when someone finds out they're pregnant and they don't have money, first thing they think, how am I going to take care of this child? There's $1,000, there's $100,000, sorry, that you can receive to gain some assistance in that area. Then there's an increase in the We Care cash grant that goes up to $200,000. So now you have school-age children that initially maybe you're concerned about how you're going to provide for them. Transportation, maybe their books, maybe their bags, maybe their shoes, things like that. It's covered. You can focus on other areas of your family, because we're going to take care of that. Your child goes to CXE and they have to write subjects. You don't have to worry about that. We're going to take care of that. And when they get to university, all the way through, you're talking about access to education. Education is still the key to success, Kiana. I've seen that. I've experienced that. My parents believed in it. I know Guyanese believe in that. This, to me, is the party saying we understand that education is the key to your success, and we're coming in to help your family get there. The second thing is this document, the next administration puts money in people's hands. Not just cash grants, but the ability to leverage some of the opportunities that we're talking about. So with community banks or development bank with 0% interest on loans, we can start to see young people who have ideas. And this is what's really important. Remember, the world has problems, right? And the way to start a business is by not complaining about a problem, but solving it. Right? So problems are really opportunities that's staring us in the face, and we've got to make a decision. Do I complain? It's okay to complain, but also come up with a solution for that problem. And I think that there are lots of opportunities in so many different communities that we need to start leveraging, right? So many different opportunities. I think with the hotels that we're seeing in the country, the development that we're seeing in our country, we just talked about technology, right, in our country, engineering, so many health, right? So many different areas. I think that there are many opportunities now for young people. And this says, we will work with you. We'll provide the assistance necessary for you to start your own business, succeed at your own business. And I'm sure even as we get into the administration, we're going to see other forms of support to help people succeed and put money in their own pockets. The last one is important for me because it deals with inclusivity. I have a nephew who has autism, and I know how difficult that is for his family and how it changes families. And I don't know if other manifestos have looked at that, but this one goes to the heart. This plan is looking at how to create an inclusive, safer, more caring society. I'm actually working on a project that deals with disabled children, and so that those students can get the opportunity to succeed. They need specific kinds of intervention. How are we going to include them in other schools? How are we going to provide the needs that they have? There are families out there that are struggling with that. Mm-hmm. This plan specifically addresses those issues for an inclusive society that protects women, that protects children, and that looks out for those who are considered disabled in our society. It puts money in their pocket, but it also sets up institutions and brings and trains, gets the skills necessary for us to be able to support families like that. That's why I'm supporting this plan. That's why I think everyone should go and read this. And this is beyond all of the infrastructure and all of the amazing things and the technology that's happening. Family, businesses, business opportunity and money in our pocket, and the ambition to build a society that now is going to be more caring, a society that realizes we need to be more inclusive, because if we're going to develop as a country, everyone has to participate, everyone has to benefit from this new Guyana that we're building. That's why I'm behind it.
Dr. Dalrymple, thank you so much for your time. It has been certainly a pleasure to learn about your background and to understand a little bit more about the difference you hope to make in our society and with the People's Progressive Party Civic. So thanks once again.
Thank you so much for having me here.
To our audience, thank you as well for joining us. Please be sure to tune in next time as we bring you more insights from thought leaders within our political landscape. I'm Kiana Wilberg, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.